Hello and welcome to the topic An Introduction to Existentialism. The beginnings of existentialism. Existence precedes essence, says Jean-Paul Sartre. In a nutshell, this statement summarizes the major argument of the philosophical thought generally called existentialism. Though Sartre is most famous among the many names usually associated with this school of thought, several commentators believe that the thinking associated with existentialism did exist much before him. Two crucial thinkers were born in the 19th century. The Danish thinker and theologian Soren Kierkegaard and the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche are the major figures who developed this system of thinking. Many scholars believe that existentialism could be traced even in William Shakespeare, especially in the hero's dilemma in Hamlet. Others trace it to St. Augustine's Confessions. The other names usually linked with this movement are the Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky, French novelist Albert Camus, Sartre's own longtime associate and famous feminist thinker Simone de Beauvoir, the Czech writer Franz Kafka, German philosopher Martin Heidegger, and French thinker Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Even though their approach varied, one major thought common in all these thinkers was about the individual's role in the society, more clearly in the peculiar understanding of human life against the norms of the society. There is also another group of scholars who believe that existentialism is not a philosophical school of thought, but only a cultural movement resulted out of the writings of Sartre and others. Variedly, others see only the writings of Sartre as existentialism. As opposed to the ideas proposed by the ancient philosophy and science, existentialism brings forth certain ideas about human existence. The word existence is derived from the Latin word existere, which means to stand out. The word also meant come into being. From this understanding of the word itself, a possible definition of existentialism could be derived. It means that human beings stand out against the world she lives in. She also comes into being on her own against the otherwise structured outer world, but every individual has a certain distance from the world she finds herself in as well. Hence, to make sense of the world one lives in, while the world itself does not help in finding the meaning of life, becomes very difficult. Hence, there is real danger of one finding meaninglessness in life itself and committing almost a spiritual suicide. Basic premises of existential thought. One of the basic premises of existentialist philosophy is the anxiety that human beings are responsible for all their basic behavior. An individual always finds himself or herself against the rule bound society, but he or she is not answerable to the society at large. What she is responsible for and answerable to is one's own self. Hence, human beings and their existence should not be identified with substances with fixed properties or with identifiable material objects. In that sense, existentialism is against the universal and general truths. What that means is that there cannot be any objective knowledge. Just the same way, existentialist philosophy also is concerned seriously with the question of being. In other words, the question is a fundamental one that many of the existential philosophers have asked: what is being? Many philosophers believe that being has no meaning. The problem is that we always associate the being of an object in relation to another one. Hence, no object has any innate value. I am has no value or meaning in itself. It makes sense only in relation to what we do with that combination of words in a sentence and in a particular context. Therefore, being and nothingness are closely related. Being then is an individual venture. The individual is the absolute source of all the knowledge and all the impressions of the world. Moreover, existentialism is fascinatingly concerned with some of the fundamental and immediate questions that every individual asks at certain stages of one's life: who I am, what I am, and what is my life. A subsidiary question is, what is to be human? The apparent answer is that there could be no objective criteria which constitute the human. Questions like what is the meaning of life and what happens after life are asked by several of the writers who followed existentialism around the middle of the 20th century. Aesthetic existentialism is supposed to be the most popular version of existentialism that everyone discusses in the contemporary times. This has its roots in Nietzsche and Sartre, the two popular figures who not only produced philosophy but also many other books which are read all over the world. But from the time of Kierkegaard, there has always been a persistent and important strain of existentialism that embraces the existence of God. Some of these thinkers, including the Jewish author Martin Buber, have developed theologies that stress the importance of personal relationships between people and God. Like all other existentialists, they value the concrete, the personal and the intimate over the systematized and universal. In that respect, they do not fall in the same category of nihilist and aesthetic existentialism. However, they see religion as the lived experience of individuals rather than the systematized practice of the church or even the Bible. Like Kierkegaard, many of these existential philosophers reject the notion that faith and reason could go together. They believe that reason has its own place, but it should not be allowed to rule over the personal, the individual and the free choice to believe. According to them, to have faith is the only solution, especially in the circumstance where there is a complete and final rational proof. Like many other human life experiences, faith is irrational. So is the experience of the love of God. Hence, these existentialists see no reason to be apologetic for or cover up that fact. In many ways, their philosophies are a call to return to an earlier time when religion was a personal, immediate and passionate experience. The problem they find is in the overt structuring of the belief in terms of an organized church. They were also cynical about the intellectualized pursuit of some obscure point of theology. Kierkegaard, Nietzsche and God. 19th century posited a major problem to the concept of God. The scientific and industrial developments rampant in Europe influenced several thinkers. Among them, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche brought the issue of individuals' relationship with God. While asserting that Christianity has lost its influence over people, Kierkegaard was interested in trying to find the actual role of Christianity in leading the way to God. On the other hand, Nietzsche pronounced the death of God itself. However, instead of just trying to place Nietzsche as just another atheist or nihilist, one should attempt to understand the subtle and rather nuanced understanding of divinity in his writings. Kierkegaard's recurrent theme was the individual subjectivity as against objective truth. Some of the interesting issues that he dealt with, like despair, alienation and subjectivity, later became the core aspects of existential philosophy. Another important factor that he stressed is the idea of self and its relation with the world. He also proposed reflection and introspection as most required aspects of life on the part of the individual to live a better life. Nietzsche, by pronouncing the death of God in several of his books, was trying to make clear that any binding principle which gives meanings to objective truth becomes absent, resulting in multiple perspectives. In such a situation, life lacks any purpose and nothing associated with any grand value as well. Kierkegaard's early works are devotional in nature. The books like Training in Christianity and Works of Love belong to this category. However, in the later works like The Sickness unto Death and Practice in Christianity, we find a different author. He is more insightful towards the contemporary life. Here is where his ideas about existentialism are clearer than his earlier works. We find his elaboration on life and its relationship with divinity in these works. He says that the contemporary world is sensible. He criticizes the same world for not having any passion. He starts discussing the nature of human beings in a crowd. According to him, the conformity and assimilation of individuals into the crowd are considered to be the truth of life, which for him is a problem. He claims that the individual subjectivity is in danger in these circumstances, hence the crowd is untruth. What he discovered was truth not only about himself, but also about the human condition. He was one of the first to develop in an extended way, if not quite in a systematic way, central existential themes such as the absurdity and forlornness of life, the importance and weight of choices, and the need to live passionately and authentically. He developed all these themes in a radically new kind of Christian context. He rejected the traditional themes of Christianity and systematic answers of philosophy of his time. Instead, he embraced a vision of faith in which belief is considered to be a real choice and one that absolutely cannot be validated or justified by reason. Nietzsche's major philosophical preoccupation was with the idea of life affirmation. This idea involves an honest questioning of one's own beliefs. This kind of questioning should not take into consideration the social relevance of these beliefs themselves. His major works, including Thus Spake Zarathustra and The Will to Power, are celebrated for their style. Sometimes they are too difficult to understand as well. They are deep and dense writings on morality. In many of his books, we also see him questioning the very nature of values in human society. He also questions the way science functions in terms of the objectivity. Nietzsche is critical of science gaining the holding power which was once occupied by God. Science is viewed by him as something which holds and organizes truth around it. He says science cannot simply replace God. He did not stop at the church and science. Nietzsche was a perceptive social critic as well. His interest was not just centered on these larger themes. He was a perceptive critic of several contemporary practices too. He vociferously attacked everything he saw as false. He also criticized anything which he found damaging to human development. But Nietzsche wasn't simply an agent of destruction. In The Gay Science, he spoke of wanting to be only a yes-sayer to find a way to affirm everything in life. Existentialism gets its fundamental optimism from Nietzsche. He had the sense that after we tear down the wheel of falsehoods, we would create for ourselves a world which is joyful and which we all will love. Both Kierkegaard and Nietzsche are in that sense preoccupied with the individual who finds himself or herself in the large world without being able to make sense of the rules of the world. They were also concerned with the basic nature of good, evil and morality. The most important aspect of these early thinkers is the fact that they are trying to question the already established fundamental truths of the society. In that sense, 19th century existentialist thinking is more about laying the foundation for the later thinkers. These ideas are taken by later thinkers much more to the extreme. The meaning of self and existence. A major question the existentialists ask is what is to be human? If the 19th century philosophers had tried to answer this in terms of the individual's existence against God, the 20th century thinkers, after the bad experience of the First World War, think in terms of one's own association with friends, family and the society. To be human is to follow the rules stipulated by the larger society. This does not necessarily mean that the existentialist thinkers refuse to comment on humanity as a whole, but their major concern was to show how an individual differs from the larger humanity. If Kierkegaard was thinking at a time when he felt that the binding principle of Christianity is lost, Nietzsche in the second half of 19th century thought the society had become decadent and weak. So far as the 20th century thinkers are concerned, post-war society's lamentation of losing any moral purpose to life is clearly reflected in the kind of questions existentialism raised. While engaging in an understanding of human essence, Sartre was always in an unending debate with Christianity and Marxism. Being a teenager in the post-World War era and being drafted into war and serving as a prisoner of war during the Second World War, Sartre developed a cynical view of the world. It is in this context we should understand Sartre's idea on the existence. When he claims that existence precedes essence, what he really means is that it is the actual life which determines the meaning for individuals' existence and that there is no predetermined essence to life. The values are actually created by the individual's own consciousness and not by any given property already at work. In claiming the importance of existence over essence, he was really reacting to the metaphysical philosophy which is concerned with the fundamental nature of being and the world. For Sartre, existence comes first and the essence is derived afterwards. Existence in that sense is a thing which decides one's supreme moral entity and the individual and subjective aspects of one's life. Writing as he was at a time when the war colored the worldview of all the thinkers, these ideas created a popular imagination. Sartre's notion of freedom also needs an elaboration in this respect. The essential freedom that a man has is to say no. This is the actual freedom for Sartre. There is a creative aspect for this freedom, but there is also an element of negativity about this freedom. Consciousness and freedom are the two sides of the same coin. Even if someone is forced to say things which one will not say otherwise, the consciousness will still be able to say no. That is the nature of freedom and consciousness. For Sartre, it is this finality of freedom that makes a man, and that is the absolute residual truth about being. We should also keep in mind that this kind of an absolute freedom that Sartre prescribes for human beings was given to God by the metaphysist. We find Sartre talking the traditional existential themes and injecting a new emphasis upon the meaning and importance of human freedom. Being and Nothingness is a landmark book in this respect. He had admitted that he wrote parts of it in a sleep-deprived, drugged stage. Some of the parts of this book are poorly written and sometimes completely nonsensical. However, what Sartre did better than any previous writer was to make existentialism accessible to all people to whom it was supposedly relevant. One of the ways he did this was through the constant dialogue he engaged in with other important movements. He was considered to be the most influential public figure during his time not only in France, but also the world over. His influence and interest were not just concentrated in the aspects of philosophy, but also in politics, the art and literature. Although he said he later regretted it, he also wrote the ultimate summary of the existential position in the now famous Existentialism is a Humanism. This is a short essay that attempts to explain the philosophy in non-technical terms to his critics and the larger public. According to the French existentialist Albert Camus, the fundamental question of philosophy is that of suicide, of whether life is worth living. The other existentialists would not approach the question from the same standpoint. The traditional religious and ethical philosophy might ask, how should I live? The existentialist more fundamental question is, how can I live? If life is meaningless, if the stories that we have heard are not valid, how can you even approach the question of how you should live? How can human beings hungry for meaning live without giving into despair when no meaning is provided to them in terms of the self and the existence? Hence, according to this school of thought, the individual is responsible for one's own actual existence. Let us summarize the important ideas discussed so far. In this unit, we looked at the origins and various aspects of the philosophical school called existentialism. We have tried to understand the originary principles of existentialism through an engagement with the ideas of Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century thinkers. Through an understanding of the basic ideas regarding God, self and existence, we tried to get to the basic tenets of this stream of thought. We also tried to understand why this philosophy is more popular than other forms of philosophical thinking. Now, here are some questions to work out. Number 1. How would you call a 19th century theologian an existential philosopher? Number 2. What is essence and why is it that existence is more important than essence according to Sartre? Number 3. What is the relationship self and the crowd according to existentialism? Number 4. Why is existentialism cynical about science? Number 5. What is the problem with the term atheistic existentialism? Number 6. What are the context of Nietzsche's pronunciation of the death of God? Now, let me suggest a few books for your reference. Irrational Man, a Study in Existential Philosophy by William Barrett, published by Doubleday Anger Books, New York, 1958. Existentialism, a very short introduction by Thomas R. Flynn, published by Oxford University Press, Oxford, 2006. The Philosophy of Existentialism by Gabriel Marshall, published by Citadel, New York, 1961. Let us wind up this session here. Goodbye and take care.